People, if I leave them in the car with the window down, I come back and there's people talking to them through the window. And when people meet me in the street, they'll say, "Hi Drew, how you doing? Like the programme, where's Enzo?" It's always their first question.
You probably fell in love with Salvage Hunters for the barn finds, the haggling, the deals that shouldn't have worked, but worked. But if we're being honest, it wasn't the antiques that kept you watching, it was the people. And behind the scenes, that same cast was falling apart.
Short message just to let you know that after 11 years with Salvage Hunters, I've decided it's time to move on.
One of those guys is gone from our screens entirely. One survived a divorce that nearly destroyed him.
And the next series of Salvage Hunters, which we shot last year and airs in the autumn, is my last.
Another watched his house burn down. So what really happened, and why did they walk away? These are 10 of the most tragic departures reality TV has ever seen. So don't go anywhere. You'll want to see this till the end. John T. His departure was one of the quietest and strangest exits among the stars of the show. The real reason was kept from fans for months, and people only pieced it together long after he had already disappeared from the screen. According to what has come out since, he spent years pushing through tiredness that never went away, lifting and carrying antiques across the country while his own body was working against him. For a long time, nobody outside his close circle knew why. He was John T., the loyal driver and travel companion who spent over a decade by Drew Pritchard's side, the steady presence fans loved because he never asked for attention. For most fans, his sudden disappearance turned out to be more troubling than anyone expected. For years, John T. had hypothyroidism, a condition where the thyroid does not work properly. It drains the body from the inside, causing constant tiredness, weight gain, and a slow loss of the strength his job needed. It is the kind of illness that does not show up all at once. It builds up slowly, day by day, until the person living with it can barely recognize how much they have lost. After years of quietly pushing through it, something had to change. In 2023, after more than 11 years on the show, John T. simply stopped appearing. There was no goodbye episode, no explanation on camera, and no statement from the producers. Fans were left to figure out his absence on their own, and it took time before the truth about his health scare came out. The full details of his condition were never made public. T chose privacy over sympathy and disappeared from social media completely. John T. is alive today. He is said to be focused on getting better, far from the cameras that once followed his every move. But his exit would turn out to be just one of many painful goodbyes among the cast. Craig Hughes. Next up is Craig Hughes. To most viewers, he was the master upholsterer, quietly working in the background of Salvage Hunters and its spin-off, The Restorers.
This is no good now because it's all broken up. That's the top layer of cotton felt, fabric and calico.
The man who could take a ruined chair or a worn-out seat and bring it back to life with 3.5 decades of skill behind every stitch. But behind the scenes, Craig was fighting a battle that had nothing to do with fabric or thread. In March 2022, Craig's house near Abergele caught fire. He and his wife, Nikki, made it out, but the disaster didn't end there. In the months that followed, Craig's health took a serious and frightening turn. He reportedly suffered multiple heart attacks, a devastating blow for a craftsman whose entire career depended on steady hands and physical endurance. Friends rallied around him. A close friend set up a fundraiser to help cover legal costs and support Craig and Nikki through a period that had spiraled far beyond the fire itself. For a man who spent his life restoring what others had given up on, it was now Craig who needed rescuing. But despite all of that, he survived. He kept working, kept his business alive, kept showing up at his shop in Colwyn Bay. But television had one more twist waiting for him. Later, as production costs rose, Craig was quietly dropped from both shows, not because of his health, but because he'd become, in his own words, too good at his job. His calm competence, ironically, made for less compelling drama on screen. As of today, Craig is still restoring furniture, still respected as one of the finest upholsterers in his field. His story didn't end in tragedy, but it came far closer than most fans ever realized. And while Craig walked away with his life and his craft intact, the next name on this list disappeared so quietly that even now, nobody is quite sure why. Gavin Bartlett. Up next is Gavin Bartlett. To most viewers, he was one of the original faces of Salvage Hunters, a skilled restorer who appeared right from the show's first episode in 2011 and returned years later for its spin-off, The Restorers. But behind the scenes, Gavin's story became one of the strangest disappearances in the show's history, not because of any confirmed tragedy, but because of the silence that followed him. After his final appearances on The Restorers in 2019, Gavin simply stopped showing up. There was no farewell segment, no statement from producers, no explanation from Gavin himself. Fans who had watched him restore pieces alongside Drew Pritchard for years were left with nothing but questions. Where did he go? Was he okay? Nobody said. What makes Gavin's exit so unusual is the complete absence of a digital trail. He has no active presence on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. The only trace left behind is a largely dormant LinkedIn profile listing his location as Wales, a faint signal from a man who otherwise vanished from public life entirely. That silence has left room for speculation, some of it dramatic and unverified, but nothing in the record points to illness, injury, or any single crisis. The far simpler and more likely truth is that Gavin, never a lead cast member to begin with, chose to step back from television and return to a private, working life away from cameras. Now, stay with us, because the next person on this list didn't get to walk away quietly. His story played out in headlines. Drew Pritchard. Remember that deadpan haggling style Drew Pritchard was famous for? Walking into a dusty old barn, spotting one gem buried under a pile of junk, and talking the seller down with a straight face and a dry one-liner that had the whole crew laughing behind the camera. How many times have you thought back on one of those moments and just laughed? Well, behind that same sharp wit was a man whose personal life was unraveling in ways that had nothing to do with antiques. In 2017, Drew Pritchard's marriage to Rebecca, his wife and business partner of over 2 decades, ended in divorce after his affair with another woman became public. The fallout didn't stay private for long. The husband of the woman Drew had been involved with confronted him outside a pub in Conwy, and the encounter turned physical. It was a brutal, public unraveling for a man whose entire public image had been built on trust and expertise. The pressure didn't stop there. In 2022, Drew closed the Conwy shop that had anchored his career for years. In a 2025 special, he admitted he had blown through a €200,000 restoration budget on a project and had to sell personal belongings just to finish it. A stunning admission from a man whose whole brand was built on finding value in what others discarded. That same year, after 14 years and more than 240 episodes, Drew stepped down from the main show. There was no single crisis behind it, just the slow accumulation of a life rebuilt more than once in public view. Rebecca Pritchard. Few people connected to the Salvage Hunters world understood the antiques trade as thoroughly as Rebecca Pritchard. While she was not the one hunting through barns and old estates on camera, She was the steady presence behind every deal, the one who examined the details Drew brought back from his long expeditions. Rebecca built her reputation through years spent in the fashion industry before moving into property development and antiques restoration alongside her husband. Viewers trusted her judgment because she had a knack for spotting real value beneath the surface. Yet behind that steady expertise was a woman quietly holding together a life that was about to fall apart in public. Inside the world of Salvage Hunters, Rebecca was viewed as more than just a co-star. She was a working partner, handling valuations and restoration estimates that gave the show's biggest deals their substance. Her presence on screen made the business feel like exactly what it was: a family operation built on trust. The show continued to grow, and from the outside, it looked as though the Pritchards had built something that would last. But sometimes the very thing that holds a life together can be the first to break. What happened next shocked people far beyond the antiques world. In 2017, after more than 2 decades together, Rebecca and Drew Pritchard separated following reports of his affair with another woman. The fallout played out under intense public scrutiny, with the story spreading well beyond antique circles and into tabloids covering the pub confrontation that followed. Rebecca did not walk away from the business. News of the split spread quickly through the show's fan base, with viewers who had watched the couple's on-screen chemistry for years struggling to process that the partnership behind it had quietly come undone. Alex Webster. Few restorers earned as much quiet respect on Salvage Hunters as Alex Webster. Trained by his own father, who ran a French polishing business in Old Colwyn, Alex Webster grew up inside the trade, spending his school holidays learning the craft before opening his own restoration business, the French Polishing Emporium, in his 20s. Viewers watched him handle centuries-old Chippendale chairs worth tens of thousands with the same calm precision he brought to the simplest repair. He never chased the spotlight. Instead, he let the work speak. Yet behind that steady confidence was a man who kept his personal life almost entirely off camera. And that silence would eventually become the whole story. Alex joined the Salvage Hunters in 2012 and remained a fixture for over a decade, across both the main series and its spin-off, The Restorers. Then his appearances began to thin out. By 2020, he was gone from the main show. By 2023, a year before The Restorers was even canceled, he would disappear from that too. There was no farewell segment, no interview, no explanation from Alex himself. For a craftsman who had spent more than 10 years earning viewers' trust, the sudden quiet left longtime fans wondering if something had gone wrong behind the scenes. Some speculated he had been pushed out. Others assumed health problems were to blame. None of that turned out to be true. Alex hadn't vanished. He had simply moved on.
Now, wax polishes are a colour mixed with a solvent to dissolve beeswax, and you paint it on. Once that solvent that's dissolved the wax has evaporated.
Resurfacing as an expert on Kings of the Wood, a different restoration series entirely, doing the same meticulous work under a new name. There was no tragedy, no falling out, just a private man who never felt the need to explain his exit. But Alex wasn't the only restorer whose quiet departure left fans guessing. Another familiar face vanished from the show around the same time, and her story is even harder to pin down. Let's find out what really happened to her. Jolene Farmer. If Alex Webster was the show's quiet furniture master, Jolene Farmer was its detective of light and metal. She began her training at 16, apprenticed to a master gilder in Venice, before studying at Central St. Martin's and later working at the British Museum, Sotheby's, and the Courtauld Gallery. By the time she joined the Restorers in 2018, she had already spent years mastering a craft so specialized that, In her own words, there was no formal course anywhere that could teach it. Viewers came to know her as the woman who could take a shattered antique chandelier and coax it back to life piece by delicate piece. But the same intensity that made her work so captivating also made it relentless, and few outside her studio ever saw that side of it. For 3 years, Jolene was one of the show's most reliably fascinating segments, juggling 2 or 3 major restorations per series and describing the pace as, in her own words, completely full on. Then, after 2021, she simply stopped appearing. There was no announcement, no send-off, nothing beyond her final credited episode. Fans who had followed her work from the British Museum to primetime television were left asking where she'd gone. Rumors floated around online that the workload had finally worn her down, that she had stepped away for her health, or simply burned out. While none of that has been confirmed, what we know is that Jolene was not forced out by hardship. Instead, Jolene Farmer simply turned her full attention back to her growing business, now training a team of 6 apprentices in a craft she's determined not to let disappear. Her story isn't one of loss. It's one of a woman who treated television as a stepping stone rather than a destination. But not every name from this era of the show got to leave so quietly. Stay tuned, because the next departure came with a far louder ending. Saxon Durren. Saxon Durren's path to Salvage Hunters started about as far from television as it gets, working market stalls in Hackney, building a reputation one sale at a time before landing supply deals with major retail and food chains. By the time producers brought him onto The Restorers in 2019 as a featured antique dealer, he had already spent years learning to spot value where most people saw junk. Over 35 episodes across 5 years, Saxon became one of the show's most consistent presences, a dealer whose sharp eye and obvious love for a piece's history made him an easy favorite. Even so, his run on the show was living on borrowed time, tied to a spin-off whose fate was never entirely his to control. When The Salvage Hunters was cancelled in 2024 after 6 seasons, Saxon's run ended along with everyone else's. For a moment, it looked like his story might follow the same pattern as Alex Webster's and Jolene Farmer's. A familiar face fading from screens with no explanation, leaving fans who'd watched him for half a decade to wonder where he'd gone next. This time, the answer came fast, and it came with an upgrade. Saxon didn't disappear, he leveled up, landing a new role as a valuer on Channel 4's Greatest Auction, trading one primetime antiques show for a bigger one. In interviews since, he's spoken openly about his journey from market stalls to national television, still chasing the same fascination with patina and character that pulled him into the trade decades ago. Of everyone who left Salvage Hunters behind, Saxon Durren's ending is the rare one that reads like a beginning, proof that not every exit from this show was a door closing. Enzo. Remember Drew Pritchard? Before the divorce, before the pub confrontation, before any of the very public turmoil that would later define headlines about him, there was a companion who never left his side, and losing him would turn out to be one of the quietest heartbreaks of Drew's time on screen. That companion was Enzo, his Jack Russell Terrier, who became the unofficial mascot of Salvage Hunters almost by accident. For years, viewers watched Drew travel the length of the country hunting for lost treasures, with Enzo riding along for nearly every mile of it. The dog wandered through Drew's warehouse in his own dedicated tour video, made cameo appearances during buying trips, and built enough of a following that fans started asking about him by name in the comments of every episode.
Enzo's sort of taken his newfound fame quite well. He's got a little bit haughty about it, but he's all right. As long as he's got a biscuit, he's quite happy.
Drew leaned into it, even having a small bronze button bearing Enzo's likeness stitched onto the back of his signature tweed caps, a permanent nod to a dog who had become almost as recognizable as the antiques themselves. Then, in 2019, came the announcement nobody wanted. Enzo, Drew Pritchard's dog, had died. The cause was never made public. Drew kept that part private, and fans were left with nothing but the confirmation itself. Tributes poured in from viewers who had never met the dog in person, but had watched him grow older across nearly a decade of episodes, the way you might watch a friend's pet age from a distance. For a show built entirely around discovering value in things other people had given up on, losing its most beloved living fixture hit differently than any antique ever could. Drew never got another dog. Whether that came from grief, from loyalty to Enzo's memory, or simply from not wanting to put a new dog in a role so closely tied to the one fans had lost, he never explained it outright. But the absence spoke for itself, season after season. Even now, years later, Enzo still comes up whenever longtime fans talk about the show, proof that the most quietly devastating loss connected to Salvage Hunters was not a person stepping away from the cameras. It was a companion who had been there for almost the entire journey. And then, suddenly, was not. Now, buckle up, because the very last name in this list is someone that would really surprise you. Ralph Ineson. Every episode of Salvage Hunters, the restorers opened with the same voice, calm, weathered, instantly recognizable if you'd ever watched Game of Thrones, the Harry Potter films, or The Office UK.
It's a Monday morning in Conwy, North Wales. An antique salvager, Drew Pritchard, is preparing to hit the road in search of more stock for his shop.
That voice belonged to Ralph Ineson, the narrator who guided viewers through nearly a decade of restorations without ever once appearing on screen. Fans who could quote his lines had no idea they were hearing one of Britain's most in-demand character actors. He was there for every single episode, and most people watching never knew his name. But even Ineson's steady voice couldn't outlast what came next. In 2024, after 6 seasons and dozens of restorers passing through its workshops, Salvage Hunters, The Restorers, was cancelled. There was no dramatic farewell episode, no on-screen goodbye to the craftspeople who had spent years turning wrecks into treasures. The show simply stopped. And with the end of the show came the end of the voice that had been there from the very first episode to the last. In the end, it wasn't one person's exit that closed this chapter. It was the whole world Drew Pritchard built, gone all at once. Every departure on this list, the ones we understood and the ones we never got an explanation for, all led here. The show that turned junk into gold finally ran out of things to save. So what do you think? Which of these departures hit you the hardest? And which one genuinely surprised you? Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. If you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.